welcome. Thank you, everyone, for coming to partake in our little chat. We're going to be discussing the implications of the proposed changes to the Quebec video game tax credit. But more importantly, I think we want to be taking a look at this from a national perspective and essentially ask everyone to kind of put yourselves in the same shoes. What if similar proposed changes were to happen within your province? Perhaps equally important, maybe even more, is the global impact. When we're taking a look at our competitiveness on a global level, people are asking as to what these proposed changes may mean. So a couple of quick points on clarity that we thought might make sense before this discussion. One, especially to anyone who is unfamiliar perhaps with the Canadian tax system, we're talking about tax credits here, but really what they are is a rebate. They're a labor rebate, and they're structured in the same way wherever there is a provincial tax credit related to games. Also, they're one of a handful of public support mechanisms, but given that we have a limited amount of time today, they're the only one that we're going to focus on. So yes, we could be exploring CMF and other similar programs internationally, but we just don't really have time. So we're going to focus on this area. As anyone with an earshot of me over the past handful of months, ever since these proposed changes were announced, knows it's a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I really haven't been able to shut up about. A lot of people Lucy, Jean-Jacques can even attest to that as well. So when these proposed changes, were proposed, and a little redundant there, a few months back, we were immediately hounded by calls. And it wasn't just from our clients within Quebec, it was across Canada. There was a lot of interest generated, and even beyond. We had a lot of calls for opinion from HSBC in London. So there were international lenders and international institutions that were curious as to what might be happening here. So just a little preface. Myself, I'm Matthew Wallish. I'll be the moderator here today. I'm a co-founder and partner at InsertCoin. We're a tax and funding strategy firm. We're well suited within this space because we've been doing this for nearly 2 decades, and we've got a lot of data points to really understand what proposed changes may have as far as impacts on various clients. Kind enough to join me here today on the panel. I have 2 people who have been admirably advocating for our industry for a number of years now. Lucy Lalumiere is President and CEO of Interactive Ontario, and Jean-Jacques Hermon is Director General of La Guilde in Quebec. Given that we're looking to explore beyond the borders of Canada, we're fortunate enough to be joined by Christian Roberts as well, and he's in a perfect position to shed some light. Christian is the CEO of Nordicity, and although Canada is home to Christian, I'm going to read this because I want to get it perfectly correct. For decades now, Nordicity has been preparing studies worldwide regarding the implementation, design, and evaluation of creative industry support systems. I'm sure many of you have been privy to studies that have been conducted by Nordicity to help support ESAC and CMF. A lot of the data that we see in an industry that for a number of years was starved of data is coming from the efforts of Nordicity and Christian, so thank you very much. So as we're getting started here, I just want to kind of get a quick read of the room and poll the audience. How many people are coming from Quebec or have some roots in Quebec? Interesting. So only a few in the room. Ontario. Okay. BC. Anywhere else in Canada? Okay. Internationally? And how many of you are just here from my team to heckle me knowing I've slept for like 2 hours for the past 2 days and I'm probably going to make a lot of mistakes? Yeah, you guys. Thank you. Okay, let's get things started here. I really want to start with looking at not even the changes, but kind of a bit of a history of tax credits in Canada as a whole, not specific to any one province. I know every one of us has an understanding of this, but I think Christian's really well suited. So I'm going to turn that over to Christian.
Well, I guess they all kind of start in different places, but Jean-Jacques can speak to the history in Quebec, but of course that's a sort of a single deal that occurred around landing a large studio that might be represented in this room. But I think in other provinces, and perhaps more commonly, they were created by, including that in Ontario, by looking around at what other provinces are doing and say, hey, we want one of those. And so typically what that meant was taking an existing tax credit, one that was for, let's say, film and television, crossing out the words film and television, and writing in the words interactive digital media or video games or what have you. And that, of course, leads to challenges because, of course, these are different industries that have different structures, and labor works differently in those industries. Just to provide a simple example, you make a movie, you hire a bunch of people, you bring them on set, and then they go away. When you make a video game company, you hire a bunch of people, you make a game, and mysteriously enough, your people still stay around. So that, or at least, they should. So that sort of gives us a sense of some of the history. And I think increasingly around the world, what has happened, just to provide a little bit of a global context on the origin point of the other tax credits, is they look to Canada, warts and all, and say, like, that works in Canada, let's get me one of those. And so adopt it either whole hog, or take the parts of those credits in Canada that they want or like.
Okay, thank you. Also, I think it's very important to acknowledge that these are proposed changes as they stand now. They haven't been approved, they haven't been voted on. Jean-Jacques and everyone in Quebec has been fighting tooth and nail. And also like to point out that this isn't the first time. So I think I'd like to turn it over to Jean-Jacques for a moment and talk about a little bit of history with similar discussions with government over potential changes and how that unfolded in the past.
Yeah, so thank you. Just want to go back a second to the previous question. So obviously Quebec was one of the first jurisdictions, right? Not only in Canada but worldwide, globally, and this was a specific decision made by the Quebec government 25 years ago. I mean, there was some gaming already existing in Quebec, prior to the decision. So 25 years ago, 26 years ago now. But with Ubisoft moving to Montreal at the time, to Quebec, and the government really looking at the time, it was a lot about job creation, right? There was a need for job creation in Quebec, especially in that sector, right? And so that's when it started 25 years ago. Now, if you look globally, not only in Canada, but globally, many jurisdictions globally have kind of looked at what was done in Quebec, in Canada, and kind of copy-pasted, basically, and even doing better in some jurisdictions in comparing to what we have now in Canada. So, Matt, I got to go back to your question, but your question was about...
Oh, just the fact that this is still a proposal,
yes,
and the fact that it's not the first time that
no, it's not the
proposed.
first time. Actually, I believe, Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in 2014, there was a modification modifications that were made to the program at the time, and a year later, actually during the same year, in the same 12 months, government looked back at it and said, "Oh, that's not the impact that we thought would happen," and so they obviously reversed the decision. We were surprised but not shocked, I think, on March 12th when government announced some proposed modifications to the program. Modification which would, if they go through, happen in January, so early 2025. So we do have some leeway in terms of discussions with government. So again, it wasn't we're in shock. We were surprised because we have ongoing discussions with government all the time, at La Guilde, and obviously as Lucie and other provincial associations do. But government is faced with a situation where they have an $11 billion deficit, right? So I think they were looking at many different options in terms of what do we do, what are their priorities in terms of the government, for Quebec and for everybody. So do I actually, if I have $1 billion, do I actually hire more nurses, doctors? Do I build more social housing? Or do I keep the tax credits as they are now in several industries, right? So.
Okay, thank you. Kind of further to that question, again, we don't want to dwell on what the exact changes are, but as they're proposed right now, they would have an impact. I know, Jean-Jacques, you've commissioned studies to really understand how this would impact studios, and it probably impacts different studios in different ways, depending on a number of factors. So we don't want to dwell on it, but perhaps you could spend a little bit of time just addressing how those changes may come into effect.
Yeah, so we did actually ask Pricewaterhouse to do an impact study just to make sure that the numbers would come from an independent entity and not directly from the association. I think it's more valuable to government, where the numbers come from. Government also understood that the businesses would be impacted differently, whether it's a small business, whether it's a service, co-development studio, whether it's a growth business, or whether it's an international business, right? They understood. We think what they perhaps didn't really capture in their own impact study is the actual makeup of the industry. So in Quebec, we have about 350 studios, members of the association. 85% are 50 businesses with 50 employees and less. So government looked at two different, and I won't spend too much time, but basically they looked at two different measures. One being making part of the 37.5% tax credit non-reimbursable, and how do you say that?
Refundable.
Refundable, sorry. Depending if you pay tax or not, right? And then the other measure that they looked at was the first basically $18,000, not
threshold.
Being, sorry?
Just a threshold, the basic personal income threshold.
Yeah, the threshold not being accountable in how you calculate the tax credits, right? And so, and they looked at that and they said, okay, so in order to kind of compensate for that, what we'll do is we'll take off the ceiling, right? So there was a ceiling at $100,000. If your salary is $100,000, if your employee has $150,000, for example, compensation, and is admissible to the tax rate, you can only claim the first $100,000, right? And so what they decided to do is to take out the ceiling. So if you have a compensation that's $200,000 and it's admissible, then now you get the full credits. The difference was that I think what they didn't really fully taken into account was that for 80, probably 90% of the members in the studios, 50, 75 employees and less, there are very few $100,000 salaries there, right? And so there's a much larger impact on smaller businesses and studios versus the bigger structures. Right?
Thank you. Again, this specific area of the topic is where if I get started, I could go on for hours and hours and hours. So if anybody is interested in my thoughts on that, feel free to ask myself or any of us a little bit further after. But again, when I started this off, I said, we're not just looking at Quebec here. We're looking at Canada as a whole, and when we're talking about specifically labor rebates, tax credits, they are provincially based. And each province has its own kind of different challenges and different industry, not criteria, but I guess the makeup of the companies within each province is often quite different. So I wanted to kind of turn this back to Lucy. Let's say we would propose the same kind of net effect changes, call them changes, modifications, however, but if we were to propose the same thing, let's say next budget, how do you feel like that would impact studios? Would it be any different?
First off, I'm going to say this is not going to happen.
I like it. Okay.
And I have to say, like yesterday, we had meetings with our new minister of culture. He's in charge of the video game sector. He's very excited about our industry, and we've had the commitment from our government to not only maintain the tax credit in Ontario, but to modernize it. So for us, the priority in Ontario is to really tweak it so we can remain competitive and continue to grow in the province. But to answer your question, what's happening in Quebec? Quebec put Canada on the map. Quebec put Canada on the map worldwide for video games, and now investors, publishers are nervous about Canada because of what's happening in Quebec. So the government's decision there has an impact in other provinces as well. And we do hope that the government in Quebec will reconsider as much as possible, because we all benefit from Canada, from being strong And when we go to international market, we're all proud of what we accomplished here, and we want to continue to be a leader worldwide. Thank
you, Lucy. Absolutely.
If you don't mind. And I think I fully agree with you, Lucy. Our discussion with government, our message to government in Quebec, remember I mentioned 25 years ago it was about job creation. It's not about job creation anymore, right? It's a mature sector, full employment in Quebec, pretty much like in Canada, but it's about competitiveness. Mm-hmm. I think when you, and that's our message, which is actually being well received by government. The discussions are very cordial. The message is anything that you do that create instability actually impacts your competitiveness. And as a sector, that's what we're mostly concerned in Quebec about attractiveness, the ability to continue to attract investment, new businesses, new IPs, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not necessarily about the actual modification more than it is about the impact that it has on, globally.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly where I was going to turn it to. It's been my biggest concern is competitiveness on a global scale, and especially given these financial times. So
yeah, let me speak a little bit to the competitiveness. So we tend to think about competition from the kind of usual suspects, from the UK or France or Germany or something, and so that's still true. Like we are still competing for talent and investment for them from sort of Western Europe and that part of the world, and they have tax credits too. They've followed along, and to Jean-Jacques' earlier point, sometimes like in New Zealand and Australia, they had some pretty decent advice and made some even better tax credits. But that's not the competition that we should be worried about. The competition that this industry should be worried about and that we should be optimizing our tax credits for places like Brazil and the Philippines and Indonesia and Malaysia and the world that has been doing our codev for the last however many years and is now freaking good at it and tired of telling our stories and have a bunch of their own stories to be able to tell. And I think that that's where that wave of competition is coming. And and it's going to be well informed, and it's going to be paying very close attention to what we're doing here, and so I think that thinking about this as maintaining a competitive advantage, I think is something that governments really need to pay attention to, because they don't even see the wave coming, and it's going to be big.
Thank you. Everyone's kind of discussed the idea of, and Christian, you just hit on it, of policymakers designing these credits, modernizing these credits in a way to encourage competitiveness. Effectively, I guess what I'm asking here is what I've noticed in the limited experience I've had in supporting advocacy measures is that the outcome isn't the desired outcome is actually rarely what encouraged by the way that a system is designed, or even in cases, and I'm thinking here in Ontario with IDMF and changes that they put in place not that long ago, requesting additional documentation just to apply. Often there isn't a ton of forethought there's assumptions made as to how the industry is structured and how this necessarily will take effect. So I guess what I'm asking here is, what behavior should policymakers be looking to encourage to make us more competitive? How should they be going about understanding that?
All right. I do. This is my favorite question.
I know.
Thank you, Matt, for this question. The answer is making games that people want to play. And it sounds like a super trite little answer, but I think that if you come to my talk tomorrow, you will hear me talk a lot about the impact of cheap money on the video game industry, and with the sort of blindness to product market fit. And so I think that the incentive is to lower, the incentives are designed to lower business risks, right? To make it cheaper to hire people, to take risks, but they don't directly address what we're asking those people to do, right? We want them to be able to go out to the marketplace and understand whether a product is going to is going to actually sell. So what does that mean? That means maybe we don't treat marketing as a cost, but we treat marketing as an eligible labor expenditure. because they're as core to a team as your creative director, your technical lead, is the part of your team that is going to help you understand whether or not that product has legs in the marketplace. So those are the kinds of, so basically, I know it's a super trite answer, like playing games that people actually want to play, but that's not easy, particularly when you're developing your own IP.
The other thing I would add to this is that in the end, like in Ontario and elsewhere, we're developing fantastic techno-creative talent. Like we're recognized worldwide for our talent. We want these people to remain here and work here and create companies here. And right now, as we know, there's brain drain. We develop a lot of talent, and that talent goes elsewhere, and sometimes they are in their house in Toronto, but working for other corporations outside of Ontario. So governments, they want these jobs to remain here. They want the talent to create companies here, and they also want to reduce what we all call red tape. So administrative challenges that we should remove. For example, right now it's very difficult to collaborate with the way the tax credit is structured in Ontario. And we know, because you mentioned the financial conditions right now, collaboration is extremely important. So those are the things that government are looking at. How can we help entrepreneurs be more efficient and maintain the jobs here and reduce brain drain?
Mm-hmm. Jean-Jacques, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have much to add to that. I think I agree. I think whenever talking to government, discussing with government, what can be done differently. I think we're really good at making games, all across Canada. I think we're not so good at marketing games, and I think if you look at Quebec, the marketing expenses are not admissible under the CTMM, so the tax credit. That is something that we would like to change, and we've talked to government. Now, probably timing for the discussions are not optimum right now, but helping entrepreneurs, building IP, local IP, developing the IP, helping entrepreneurs learn about how to market games, how to compete globally. I think these are some of the priorities that the association in Quebec is dealing with and looking at, and certainly discussing with government. And I think that's where the brain cycle should go.
I've got a number of questions here. A little bit of limited time left.
No, go ahead.
What I wanted to talk here about is, Lucy, Jean-Jacques, your roles, we turn to both of you, as do we with other provincial institutions, to really fight this fight on behalf of studios provincially. But you are individuals representing a collaborative of people. You can't do it alone. So what I kind of wanted to get a feel from yourselves is, who else plays a role in this? What kind of a supporting role do you want, or do you achieve from AAA? What do you ask of your constituents to do? And if anything, I know that sometimes it may not help.
So at Interactive Ontario, and my colleagues across Canada as well, we have an advocacy committee. So I'm not alone. Like, I am on this committee. It's our members. It's member-driven. And we discuss together our priorities, and we also organize town halls with our members. Yesterday we had a policy forum called Impact Forum. That's where Minister Cho came as well. So we are not one person. We are as strong as our members are. And our members are very involved. They are telling their stories. So, and that's what we want them to do. When they talk to politicians, tell your stories. Tell them what they need to cut in terms of red tape to help you as an entrepreneur. And we bring them to visit studios as well to basically teach them about our industry, and that's very important. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, no one is alone. And I don't like the term fight, actually. It's not a fight, it's a discussion. Government, they have their own priorities. Like I mentioned, there's an $11 billion deficit in Quebec, so it's a social discussion more than anything else, right? And I think the national industry needs to get together and work at this together, because it's about competitiveness of our industry. It's not about just Quebec or Ontario or BC. It's about, is Canada going to stay competitive globally versus what's coming, as you mentioned, Christian, right? If I look at, and I think there's work to do on that perspective. I think there's a lot of work that's being done by the provincial associations, but I think as a national industry, we kind of lack that getting together and cohesion in terms of, because there's work that should be done at the federal level as well, which we don't do really, right? If I look at Quebec, government was actually, they actually know the industry pretty well, but they were surprised, I would say, or happily surprised, maybe not, by the fact that even the studios that are less impacted, and no one is not impacted, but some of the major structures are less impacted, as I mentioned before, because of the salary compensation or average within the studios. They're actually at the forefront of the discussions. So they haven't said, well, you know what, I mean, this is about the independent studios, smaller structures, you guys, you'll go get the job done. They're actually at the forefront of the discussion. They're financing the discussions. They're participating. And I think it's that cohesion that you can find. I can only talk about, Quebec, but I'm sure everywhere else, potentially, but in Quebec, where, this is a group, this is an industry that has grown together, and, they sit at the table, they discuss smaller studios, startups, growth, businesses, international structures, and everybody is participating and sitting at the table, right? And I think it's very important, because I think government looks at that and they see the cohesion within the industry. But again, going back to your question, Matt, I think there's a lot more that we should do as a national industry all together, not only provincially, but also at the federal level, to ensure not that, the studios don't cross the border, they go from Ontario to Quebec or from Quebec to Winnipeg or whatever, who cares, right? But that as a national industry in Canada, we remain competitive. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the major worries. That's one of the major concerns, I guess, that I would have as an individual, for the industry in Canada.
Yeah, that kind of ties back to my next question, which is how can we support each other between provinces? I know we've got a national collaboration, but again, I mimic Jean-Jacques' thinking that it could be better.
It needs an executive director, an actual staff person.
Are you volunteering?
Which means that it needs money. But the thing, I say that to be, I say that, yeah. But it's true, right? Is that so long as that organization is a volunteer organization, and I've worked with with the CIIC or Kayak, mm-hmm. or however you want to call it, from its moment of inception, right? Like when it was in 2009 or something when they created it. It was initially created out of Industry Canada with Industry Canada funding to fund which initially had an executive director. There was money at the beginning. Lucy's very surprised. But that kind of an entity to support, if it wants to be an effective organization, like any effective organization, needs actual staff that that's their day job to run, to advocate, to do whatever the members suggest. But that's basically what it needs. And so the makeup of that funding, is that some sort of combination of dues from its members, which are the provincial associations, plus some government top-up, who knows, but I think that some sort of three-lettered ministry that has an H involved in there could be a good fit. Just thinking, just putting it there.
Okay, well, I have a few here, but we're starting to get a little long in the tooth, so I wanted to just turn it over quickly to the audience and see if there's any specific questions. No?
such an exciting topic.
Interesting. So, thank you.
I know you had mentioned that there's like the implications are different for larger studios compared to smaller studios. Like larger studios with multi-provincial, I guess, arms. Like, is there any like comparable to what happens in like Alberta with the tax credit there changing?
That's a good question.
And how that impacted, I guess, in my understanding, smaller studios were less inclined to pop up there, and larger studios saw basically stagnation from the investment side from like.
Yeah, I unfortunately know too much about the situation in Alberta. I was around it. Unfortunately, it was really. If anybody went to that Reboot Red conference, it was like one day after they announced the tax credit cuts.
Yeah.
So basically, 3 days of people sitting in the woods complaining about there not being a tax credit. Quite rightly, mind you. So yeah, I mean, what that did. I mean, it's a very different situation because they went from having a tax credit to having no tax credit, and that's a very different situation than the modifications that are happening in Quebec. But what happened in Alberta is that they were promised a tax credit, went through a budget, and so as you do when you have a tax credit, it's supposed to be predictable. To Jean-Jacques' earlier point about you needing stability, so to be able to put it in your financial plans. So then they did that. They put it in their financial plans. They hired people on the basis of those financial plans, and then they said, okay, well, fool you, no tax credit for you. And then they were stuck with that with the extra risk or the burden of the staff that they had hired. So that poured a lot of cold water on the sort of medium and large size studios, the BioWares and so forth that not to speak to them specifically, but that kind of studio. It has less of an impact on startup studios. The reason that it has less of an impact on new startups is because to have a labor rebate, you must first have something to rebate, right? You need money to in that initial case to pay somebody in order for that to be later rebated. So, I mean, if you had money and you were looking to create a studio that could then grow in Alberta, for sure, definitely. Why would you do it if you could just go to BC or Ontario or something with a tax credit? But if you were like a scrappy startup indie coming out of school, trying to bootstrap your own first game, less of an impact because again, you didn't have the money in the first place. So you would be looking for things like the CMF or those other public support things that I'm not allowed to talk about. That would be more appropriate for those small companies.
I remember I was in that room too. I think Jason was probably in that room too. Is Jason still back there? He's gone. I can't remember the topic of the discussion. It was financial related, but it was a very tense environment, like you said, being a day after the cuts. I think what's really relevant to that as well is they spent 2.5+ years planning for the credits, which was longer than the credits lasted themselves. I think they were 19 months, and they were cut, as Christian mentioned, the day before Reboot. But that's not to say that even all provinces. I mean, we're sitting here with 2 provinces that have the 2 longest tenured credits, and that doesn't mean being around forever means that you're 100% safe, but it also doesn't mean that newer tax credits from other provinces aren't perhaps more secure than Alberta as well. I mean, we deal across. You've got a lot of competitiveness. You've got a lot of push, perhaps a little bit too much interprovincial competition between some of the new provinces out in the east. But they seem to be very steady tax credits where they are, because they're more recent, it's almost as though this whole idea of modernizing tax credits, they're kind of built on that modernized. Like Nova Scotia specifically, almost carbon copy took the Ontario program, but eliminated all the red tape, right? You've got Mike Gillis in PEI, who is the craziest thing, and from yourselves dealing with advocacy in the bigger provinces, he is the person who makes the change. I talked to him on the phone. He picks up the phone, and he's also the person who actually changes the policy and makes it more favorable to gaming. Now, of course, the situations out there is you deal with far fewer, just chicken and egg. Where are you going to get the talent? So I still think that what is really important are these 2 provinces, and of course BC as well, because that is where people are going to move to and going to build, and that is really what displays Canada as a global competitive threat. So that's kind of what I want to end it off and turn it back to Christian on, is where do you feel, if you were to layer everything together, where do you feel Canada currently sits from a competitive perspective?
I wish Han could pull up the chart. We actually have a chart.
Awesome.
It's we're sort of top middle, and I think that so in terms of incentives, in terms of the cost of doing business, and I think you've heard there's some guys at Aiming too, although don't ask them how they know. We're sort of top middle. Like there's some jurisdictions that from an incentive perspective do a little better, that have leapfrogged the sort of policy interventions and made credits that are do things like pay for some of your overhead and things like that. But where we still shine is the combination of those sort of incentives and the labor pool to actually make them work, right? So, part of what makes us competitive is the full employment that Jean-Jacques was talking about. We have the talent. You can go to, and this is, I'll talk about BC just to so neither of my neighbors get mad at me, or both, I guess. Is that you want to start a video game company in BC and you can be like, okay, I need a lead technical artist. Okay, cool, I have one. And so there's that labor pool is a combination of the incentive, and the labor pool is still quite positive. But you can't rest on those laurels, right? You have to keep figuring out how the world is changing, how the industry is changing, modernizing your credits to keep up with those people who can just do it fresh, Because now, Nova Scotia, Manitoba, they're old. That was old news. Because now you got people in New Zealand going, okay, well, how do we learn from what those guys in Manitoba did? How do we learn from North Carolina? How do we combine things you think about things like transferable tax credits, which allow for investors to come into things. And I promised I wouldn't get technical, so I waited to the very end. So they can't kick me out. But I think that kind of constant refinement and constant improvement is necessary to keep us competitive, but we're still doing okay.
Perfect. We got a couple of minutes left. I think both of you want to make a comment on that.
And why are those jurisdictions wanting the talent? It's because we are the creative industry of the future. The talent we are developing is transferable to all economic sectors. So that's why it's so important to have a strong video game sector in a jurisdiction.
I'm just going to go in a different direction a little bit, if I may.
Yes.
I'll be 30 seconds, but I think it's also an opportunity to learn and to look at our business models and to be more efficient. I think, if you look at the tax credit weight, I guess, in Quebec is almost $400 million to the government. So, if you have an impact, whatever province you are in, and the tax rate impact is 25 million, 30 million, 40 million, 50 million, the government isn't going to look at it too seriously. But when you grow, and that's what we're all looking for, right? It's growth. So more studios, more employees, more tax credits, and then you get 100 million, 150, and then government says, well, so when does it stop? And I think if you look globally now, there's going to be deficit across Canada in every province, right? Globally, everywhere in the world. And so I think the environment is going to become more and more difficult financially for everybody. So my take on this is we're continuing discussions with the government everywhere in Canada. We're fighting to keep our competitiveness, up and be the best in the world. But at the same time, we need to learn about our business models, and we need to become, as entrepreneurs, better entrepreneurs, and be more efficient in how we do business and how we sell our games. So,
yeah. Thank you. I actually want to talk about that more with you later on. We are unfortunately out of time. That's a very interesting note to end on. Something to? No, we are wrapped. But go ahead.
So very important. Okay, we are partnering right now with ESAC.
Oh, I feel like we
Yes.
did a survey.
Yes.
I hear you. Yes.
You ask what government want. They want data. So we're gathering data right now. So please fill out the survey.
Yeah, fill out your damn survey.
Thank you, everyone.